Hey everyone, it's Ivan, kitbatcher.com, out here for another gear review, and today, talking lights, all the turbo lights from SureFire. If you're unfamiliar, the industry has kind of taken a turn towards, hey, we're not as concerned with lumens, what we want is candela. So lumens, think of it, how bright something is. Candela, how far and tight of a beam that brightness will throw. So eventually, SureFire said, okay, like, we'll play. Keep in mind, SureFire's been in the game a long time. I was actually just talking to a buddy about this, my buddy Matt over at Tricking the Trigger, and we were reminiscing about when SureFire used to battle it out with Maglite and candle power. Who had the most candle power? So we moved forward to candela or to lumens, I guess, and now a lot of people are like, hey, I want a really high candela light. And so what potentially that, what's going on, dog? What potentially that will allow you to do is see further, which, depending on use case, can actually be really beneficial. So SureFire ended up coming out with a number of different turbo lights. Right here is their X300 Turbo. Right here is their EDC1 DFT Turbo. EDC1, yeah, I actually got it right. So everyday carry, dual fuel turbo, and then this, I forget what number, like 640 or something like that, dual fuel turbo also. So all of this stuff is turbo, high candela, and being dual fuel, you either have an 18650 battery or two 123s, or a 18350 battery, rechargeable, or a 123, and well, in here you just have two 123s. So with those are going to give you various run times and various outputs. I'll kind of, if you're into numbers, I'll give you some of those real quick. With the X300 Turbo, this will have a runtime of 1.5 hours on two 123 batteries, with I want to say 650 lumens and 66,000 candela or something like that. It's a big number. With the handheld dual fuel turbo, with this you get 650 lumens with the 18350, as well as I think 95,000 candela, if that means something to you. And the runtime I want to say is about 45 minutes. Then with a single CR123, you get 350 lumens and I believe 55,000 candela. Also with this, there is the super beam, and if you double click it, then you end up with 25 lumens, which is the low for, again, this everyday carry light. And lastly, the weapon light. This puts out 700 lumens and 100,000 candela with that 18650. And with two CR123s, you're looking at, I think, 600 lumens and 90,000 candela. The runtime is honestly one of the biggest differences between those two. The one 18650 versus the two 123 batteries. I think you get 2 3/4 hour runtime versus 1 hour with the two 123s. And something of note, I guess, this is one of their pros. So basically a built-in mount. This right here will go onto any piece of pick rail. There's also an attachment directly to M-LOK, and you can adjust to where you want on the rail, tighten that screw, and you're done. These also take pretty much any of your SureFire tail caps. So like this one right here, it's protected, ideally, so you don't have a white light ND, especially because this one's going to be really bright. I actually really like these tail caps. You can momentary on, or you can just click it and it'll stay on. But like I said, any of the SureFire tail caps, so if you want to remote a switch, anything you want to do, they have all kinds of tail caps. Also worth mentioning, while you can take the tail caps off these, you can actually take the heads off of these, not off this guy. But I've actually taken the head off of one of these and used it on a twin body light mount, where one of the, basically a exactly that, twin body light mount, where one of them took a CR123, so I actually had a key G head on that side, and then one of them had a 18350. So I had one of these guys on there. So high candela white light, and then had my IR for shifting in that spectrum, shooting under night vision. With the X300 also, the turbo, things I actually really appreciate about it is nothing else changed. So there's A and B as far as just the attachment method, how this thing goes on the gun, but you have the universal, which is basically Glock, and then you have pick rail adapter to go on anything. So you can actually run these at 12 o'clock on a rifle, which I will say the turbo actually lends itself to. And you can also switch out the back, whether it's a DG switch or remote tape switch, like pressure pad. And again, nothing changed size-wise. That's important because all of your holsters that took a SureFire X300 Ultra will now work with a SureFire X300 Turbo. So all of these are high candela lights. What does that mean? Basically, it pushes out a beam really far, a tight beam. Awesome, really good for some things. So is it a free lunch? It is not a free lunch. Everything's a compromise. And so these things excel at certain things and maybe you're lacking at others. We'll go ahead and start with this guy right here, the EDC light. Turn it on, boom, laser beam, quick tap. Now we have 25 lumens, more usable for a everyday carry light, usually. And so for me personally, I actually like honestly, their older EDC, or personal favorite is actually the Stiletto Pro. That thing is great. For me personally, there is enough light. When I want all the light, I can mash that thing. And within respect of my realistic pistol engagement distances, I can identify stuff and make shots if I need to. More than likely though, I'm just clicking the button, bam. Now I have 5 lumens to do whatever task I need, or I can click through a couple different settings. That does a really good job for me. If I was still working as a police officer, I would absolutely be using this because boom, you have a really tight focus beam that can illuminate things at a distance. And especially these days with all the liability tied to being a police officer, like what is that in the hand? Oh, it's a cell phone. Well, it's a deadly weapon and this person needs to get serviced. So being able to have a throw in that line of work, or a throw as in a really tight, really tight illuminated beam at distance to identify things is a lot more important than in my daily life where I'm using a flashlight because it's dark over here under these stairs and I'm just looking for something in a box. This does not lend itself to that. Again, totally depends on application. And the X300 Turbo. What are my thoughts on this one? Well, it is a pistol light that honestly you can mount on a rifle. I like to mount this, especially the Turbo, 12 o'clock on a rifle. Actually works great. Easy to access from regardless, right hand, left hand, anything. On a pistol, again, no free lunch. For me personally, it is a lot of light, but it comes back to application. Like where are you gonna use this? Realistically, the place this would get used is just inside my house, like that structure, which this is more light than I need inside my house. For law enforcement, again, I think this is way more valuable, especially when you look at drawing out a pistol during daylight. Think in a school, a hallway, there's a bunch of shafts of light coming through all these high windows in this hallway with a bunch of lockers, and you're trying to identify something at that far end in the shadow. This will allow you to do that versus the older X300 Ultra, which has a much larger flood, which I personally like, again, depending on application. This will do things that won't, and vice versa. Again, no free lunch. What about the weapon light? Honestly, this thing is amazing. If you are going to shoot at night, a distance, i.e. not just inside a structure in a room, this thing becomes really amazing. When I was at the RC3 rally, basically a SureFire event centered around their RC3 suppressor that they came out with, we did some shooting at night with the Turbo Lights, and amazing facility out there at Ridgeline. And yeah, we were shooting out to 300 yards. Some of the guys were shooting out to like 500 with low power variables. If you couple this light with some like magnification, you can really stretch that gun out at night. Really incredible. Is it my favorite for going into a room? I don't know. It really comes down to how you're going to use it. If you're going to spend most of your time in structures, I would probably honestly use one of their other lights. If you're going to spend a lot of time out of doors, every day, all day, it's great. Inside of structures, you have you're moving a laser beam around, like this really hot spot, not as much of a flood, which also comes into how do you use the light, where you can actually splash the light versus sweep across. Like you can actually splash the light against the ceiling, floor, whatever, and depending on color of walls, things like that, you'll get a lot of reflected light, which will help you see, but it's pretty easy to just get sucked into the laser beam that this thing throws out there. Again, no free lunch, and it really comes down to application. To give you an idea of kind of the difference, I actually went out and did some side-by-side testing, not necessarily with these weapon lights or handheld and weapon light, but with the X300 Turbo. So had a X300 Turbo, also had a X300 Ultra, kind of gold standard as far as pistol lights, and then one other one, the Holosun PID, the normal one, I guess. I think they have two versions. But basically looking at someone at 10 yards, then at 25 yards, and finally at 50 yards. And keep in mind, they have different objects in their hands, so trying to identify what those objects are as well. Right here is the X300 Ultra, kind of a gold standard. And then right here is the X300 Turbo. And right here, the PID from Holosun. Right here, I'm back at 25 yards, and here we are with the X300 Ultra. And right here, the SureFire X300 Turbo. And right here is the PID from Holosun. Right here, back at 50 yards, this right here is the SureFire X300 Ultra. And right here is the X300 Turbo. And this right here is the Holosun PID. And coming away from that, my buddy, Weston, he actually owns Carry Concealment, makes holsters up in my hometown. he gave me kind of a rundown of his experience on the other end of the light, and I thought it was kind of valuable. So here's that.
Sounds good. Yeah, so of the three more powerful lights, the X300 Ultra, definitely overwhelming light output. Pretty muted tone though. It's a pretty soft color. The Turbo, in comparison, was very obviously more violent in its tone. It was a more brighter, bluer tone, and it was even more so overwhelming. The Holosun was kind of a surprise for me. It had the same kind of color palette as the Turbo. It just wasn't quite as focused on my eyeballs like the Turbo was. I would say the Turbo by far was the most punishing.
With all of that, what has been my experience and what are my thoughts? Well, I've used these a fair bit. I will say, or I already said, I will reiterate, I don't care for this right here as a everyday carry light. It just doesn't work for me personally, as well as honestly, the Stiletto Pro. As far as a weapon light, I actually really like this because lots of times I'm actually shooting out of doors, not necessarily just in a shoot house. For a pistol light, I personally like the Ultra. The Turbo, things like moving a laser beam around. And it really, again, no longer being in law enforcement, this doesn't have the appeal to me it would if I was in law enforcement. Having said that, this at 12 o'clock on a carbine, I actually really like. Does a great job there. So again, it's application. I ended up using, use these a bunch, doing all kinds of different shooting. Use the rifle light, actually shooting in 2023. It was the Midnight Brutality. Shot in 2 divisions. One I shot in was, I think it was just called Light Fighter. And you're actually using a weapon mounted light. Shooting at all kinds of different distances at night. This was amazing. Really helped out so much. And that's one of those places where you get to see people shooting all different setups, whether it's on the night vision side or Viz light side, and see where wheels fall off. Like, just not everything is made equal. And these turbo lights, amazing output. Right here, I'm at 100 yards. This is the SureFire Vampire Scout dual cell, shooting at a 6-inch piece of steel. Right here at 100 yards, the SureFire Turbo weapon light, shooting at a 6-inch piece of steel. Right here, I'm aiming out at the 200-yard berm, piece of steel. It is actually pretty hard to see. Try a shot. Missed. Impact. That is with the SureFire Scout Vampire. Right here, aiming out at 200 yards, same piece of steel with the Turbo. If you're interested in any of these lights, there'll be links down below where you can go check them out. And keep in mind just your use case. By way of example, this is an amazing light for a buddy of mine who, part of his morning routine when he walks from relatively short distance from his house over to where his office is, basically, boom, scans the tree line looking for moose, because they will kill you, because he lives up in North Idaho in a really rural place. This is incredible for that. The distance this beam will throw, incredible. Something that had just a really broad flood wouldn't be as useful. However, I don't live out there, and while I do sometimes end up in places where moose are real, yeah, that's just not part of my everyday routine. So again, not for me. But depending on what you're doing and your intended role, yeah, some of these things are probably a good fit. But there'll be links down below if you want to check it out. And as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.